Hello everybody, welcome to this very special live stream. This is the first time I'm also live streaming to the UNO platform YouTube channel, and for this special occasion I decided to do a live stream about how to actually contribute to UNO platform, because I know that's something that many people would like to do, but it's not always easy to get started. And it's not always easy to understand what can actually a contribution be and how can you approach contributing to UNO platform, because it's a very large project and there are many areas that you can pick and choose. And so it would be nice to have a actual overview or kind of rundown of everything that can be done. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. And because we have a chat here, feel free to post any questions or any of your feedback, and I will try to answer or provide some guidance as needed. So let's get started. Let me just open my notes here. And so if you want to get started contributing to UNO platform, the best first step is to go to our GitHub, which is at github.com/UNO platform. This is the UNO platform organization, which contains all the repositories that UNO platform consists of. And it's kind of hard to go through everything because there is just so many of those repositories, but I will just explain what the most important ones are, so that you have easier way navigating between those. So the first one and most important one is UNO platform itself. That's the core UNO platform, the platform on which everything else is running. So that's simply called UNO, and that contains all the sources for UNO itself. On top of it, we have several libraries. One of them is UNO Toolkit UI, which is a set of custom controls that were built for UNO platform applications, which are not part of the default WinUI codebase. And those are usually specific controls that are most suitable for mobile applications or cross-platform applications. So those are our own controls that you can use everywhere on all UNO platform targets, but are not coming from Windows directly. Hello, I'm CNET, alumni. Okay, next up we have UNO extensions, which is a set of helpers, extensions, and tools that you can use to quickly build up your UNO platform application. So that's kind of building blocks that you can use. For example, navigation, logging, dependency injection, HTTP client, and all of these kind of smaller pieces that you can put together to make the bootstrapping and starting up of your application, of development of your application faster, and things that will just generally ease up your development. Then we have UNO themes, which is a library containing various themes that you can apply to change the appearance of your UNO platform application. So by default, UNO platform looks like a Windows application, but you can completely restyle and retheme that application by applying either material design, which is based on Google's material design, or you can switch it to Cupertino, which looks more like Apple devices design. So this repository contains these design systems that you can apply in UNO platform. Next, we have UNO Gallery, which is our sample application that contains some smaller snippets that developers can use and showcases all of the controls, all of the visual and non-visual features of UNO platform, and even shows you how you can use those. So that application is actually available on the web via gallery.platform.uno. And it's also available on mobile devices on App Store and on Google Play Store and even on Ubuntu Store. So you can download there, test it, and see how it looks. So it's kind of a showcase of many of the features that UNO platform provides. So next we have UNO templates, which is a library of templates that are used to create new UNO platform applications. So that's the thing that is generated when you click create new project in Visual Studio, or if you write .NET new in the console. Then UNO templates are used to generate the new project. Then we have UNO Playground, which is another web-based application that allows you to play with UNO platform without having to install it on your device. So this Playground is a kind of a live editor where you see on the left side a code editor and on the right side a preview of what you have written. And you can write some code here and you can then visualize that result on the right. So if I write a button OK, it gives you this nice view with the button there. So this application is mainly suited for those who want to try out UNO platform before they actually commit to it and install that plugin into Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. So then we also have UNO Samples, which is a repository containing many samples of UNO platform features and UNO platform UI that you can browse and base your application on. So there are many things like samples of how to use SignalR, there is a sample for chat UI, there is a sample for camera usage in UNO platform, then authentication and many other things. So these are a kind of source where you can pick a sample that suits your application and learn how to use a specific feature that you want to replicate in your app. So there is a question, what is the difference between UNO templates and the private repository for this? What do you mean private repository? There is, we do have a repository for the wizard that's used in Visual Studio, and that's private. But the UNO templates should be completely public. There is nothing outside of those templates that is not available in public. So you should be able to see it, see all the templates inside of this, except for some of the legacy templates based on UWP, which are still in the UNO repository. But those are just minority. All of the modern templates should be here. So if that answers the question, hopefully it should. So I will just go for the last interest, the most interesting repositories, which is Hello Dominic. Yes, so UNO WebAssembly Bootstrap is a repository containing a library that takes care of running WebAssembly.NET applications in the browser using WebAssembly. And this, even though it sounds like a UNO platform specific thing, it can be also used to run non-UNO platform WebAssembly.NET applications in the browser. But of course, the most common use of it is for UNO platform itself. So those are probably the most important and most significant repositories that you can find in UNO platform. UNO platform organization. I will just browse if there is something I forgot. There is also UNO Resizedizer, which is a tool which is used to resize images for multiple screens. So if you have SVGs in your application, this tool will automatically resize those SVGs to match different screen sizes and different DPIs for your target devices. So that's probably one more interesting repo, but that should be the main ones. So let's now switch to actually the description of how to contribute, because there are many ways, and there are many ways to how to contribute, and it doesn't have to, of course, be just code. There are many other things that you can do. So if you're not comfortable writing code, you can still contribute in many significant ways to UNO platform. So let's start with the first one, and that's writing issues and submitting feedback. Because as an open source project, we are of course dependent on people reporting issues and feature requests to us so that we can bring more value in next releases. And if you encounter some issue or something that requires a workaround in your application, it's very useful if you report it to us as an issue and we can look into it specifically. So if you have an issue or feedback, you can click the new issue button on GitHub and on any of the repos that I mentioned, and then choose one of the categories that are available. There is bug report, which allows you to report bugs. So if something is not working the way it should, or if something is working differently from Windows, then the best place to report it is a bug report. Then we have documentation issue, which is when you find a problem in our documentation where something is not correct or something is out of date, then documentation issue is the way to go. Then we have documentation request, which is especially useful for documentation that is missing. And that's quite possible that you will encounter some of those because we are growing fast and the API surface and new features are being added all the time. So there is quite a high likelihood that we are missing some documentation. So if you find something is missing, then please report it as a documentation request. Right, so then we have enhancement request, which is my favorite. It's a request for new APIs and new features in UNO platform. And of course, we have many things that are not yet implemented and are being worked on. But of course, we are also welcoming new ideas, some new possibilities that we could consider or think about for future releases. So definitely use that enhancement request. If you have some great new idea, we are going definitely to consider it and attempt to implement it. All right, next up, feedback. This is for general feedback. If you have any questions or suggestions, then feedback is good. We have also samples issue or samples request, which is for additional samples for features or APIs. So if you're missing something, these are good issue templates for that. And finally, success stories, because we love to learn about how people are actually using UNO platform in real world projects. And if you have some success with UNO platform, we want to know how you are using it and what is your favorite feature, for example, and so on. So success story is also a great place to report. Finally, for general support and questions, you can use support request, or you can also utilize our discussions where you can discuss with us live, well, not very live, but in a chat-like fashion. And the good thing about discussion is if you are not sure if something is actually a bug or if it's just a feature which you might be using in a wrong way, discussion is a place where we will try to answer. And if that's because those are public, it might be useful for other users as well. So if you don't know where to go, discussion is a great place to start. And if it turns out that your problem is actually a bug, we will also transfer that discussion into a bug or issue report. So that's about it for all the categories. And whichever you select, when you click the Get Started button, it will take you to this nice issue form editor, which was made by Dominic, who is on the chat as well, and Youssef in our team. So these forms give you step-by-step fields that you can fill out and provide information for your issue. And one important thing is that if you want us to resolve your issues faster, please be as detailed and verbose as possible, because the more information, the better. And the most important part of all issue reports is to provide a sample. And that can be either a zip of your simple code, simple sample code, or a link to a GitHub repo where you showcase the problem. And ideally, it should be a simple application, not containing too much code on top of what you're showcasing, because that will make it much easier to demonstrate the issue and to debug it. So that's for reporting of bugs. And I think then we can jump to another contribution area, which is also housed in the GitHub interface, and that's pull requests. Actually, not pull requests, but for now, code reviews, because we have a lot of pull requests, and because of the size of the team, it's not that easy to get reviews for all the pull requests as fast as possible. So if you want to learn slowly about how the solution is built and how different areas are being contributed to, pull requests reviews are very useful for us as well. So you can pick a specific pull request, open the files changed, and then see what has been changed. And if you have some suggestions or ideas how to do that specific thing better, definitely create a comment and send it as a review. That will definitely help all the contributors to improve the quality of pull requests. So that's pretty nice. All right. So that's for code reviews. And we can jump to the next way to contribute, and that's documentation. And I will open this helpful page, which is docs.unoplatform.uno, and that's our documentation, home of our documentation. It's already quite big, but we do have many missing articles, and of course everything can be improved. So if you are missing some articles or find some issue, you can contribute to documentation, and that will improve the user experience for everyone. So first off, if you find an issue on a specific page, for example, how to deploy WebAssembly on Azure Static Web Apps, you can click this blue link, improve this doc, which will link you into GitHub to the specific place where this markdown documentation file is hosted. And you can then click the edit file button and do your edits and then create a pull request. So I can change some wording here, commit changes, name the commit somehow, and then create a branch from which we will create a pull request. Now, very important thing for commits. We are using something called conventional commits. Here, conventional commits, which means that the name of the commit is quite important for your PR to pass CI. And we are including all of these prefixes like feed for feature, chore for various tasks, docs for documentation, and fix for bug fixes. So it's important that your commit message is starting with docs if you're changing the docs. So change wording, for example. So this is a acceptable commit message, but this one wouldn't pass CI. So make sure that if you're changing docs, you include the docs colon space prefix for that commit message. All right. So that's for editing existing docs. And in some cases, of course, it can happen, and it will happen, that some specific articles are completely missing. and you might want to add them. So to do that, right, I have some issues with GitHub here, but let's ignore that. So to create a specific new tutorial or article in the documentation, you can browse the specific repo. For example, here I'm in the UNO platform core repo in the articles folder. So if I want to create a new guide, I can put it here in the list and then write my documentation. And when I'm done, I need to also add that doc file into the table of contents, because if I wouldn't do that, it wouldn't show up in the documentation menu here. So if you go to docs, there's this nice menu, and if I go to specific area of it, you can see like development, about. So this whole menu structure is a table of contents that's stored in the TOC YAML file here. So if I open that and refresh, because GitHub is crashing on me, you can see some kind of navigational structure that's there. And in this case, I'm in the not completely home part of it. So let's go here. So that's YAML, but if I go to articles, for example, and refresh, I should find the TOC YAML, which includes that same structure that we saw in the documentation here. So get started, development environment, and so on. So when you create a new documentation file, you just add the href here, the name for it, and then it will finally show up in the docs when the PR is merged. Yes, the question is if it's a docfx project, and I'm pretty sure this is generated by docfx. So yes, it should be docfx running this whole thing. I don't have too much specific information about it, but it's generated using docfx, and we are gathering the documentation from multiple repos. So the UNO core is the one that's like the root of the documentation, but there are also extensions and toolkit and stuff like that, and those have their own specific documentation in their repository. So here I have extensions docs, which contains its own TOC, which is then unfolded into the extensions menu here. So it's pretty extended documentation and extensive documentation, and there are many areas that you can look into and write documentation for. And it works pretty nicely. Like we improved the search now, and it's quite easy to find articles and content that you are looking for. So that's pretty cool. So if you have any questions during the live stream anytime, just write in the chat and I will try to answer. But I will now jump into another area, and that's samples. So if you have some nice UNO platform sample that you have built and want to showcase it, or you have some specific API that you have used and wasn't documented before, you can also create a UNO sample. And that belongs in the UNO samples repo in the UI folder, where you can put your sample, create a pull request, and we will then merge it into the list of samples. And that's super useful for beginners, where people want to try UNO platform and want to learn from real world examples. So the UNO samples repo is built for just that. In the README file of this repository, we have the list of all the samples that are available. So it's then easy to browse which you are interested in. And some of these samples are actually linked also from the documentation. So if you write docs for a specific API, you can then also link to UNO samples if you have a sample where that specific API is running. So it's pretty useful to provide a real world example for your documentation as well. All right. So now let's ramp up the difficulty a little bit and start with code contributions. And specifically, we'll start with code contributions to UNO Gallery. Because the UNO Gallery is our main showcase app that's used. And we have quite a lot of samples there, which, sorry, I will open it here, which can be browsed and easily visualized. So if you want to contribute something smaller at first and want to just try out how UNO platform works and how to contribute some basic thing, UNO Gallery is a great place to start. So here we are already looking into actual code contributions, but you are contributing in a way that's kind of manageable, because this application is basically just a Windows WinUI application. So there is literally not that much platform-specific code or not that much communication with internals of UNO platform. So if you are already a Windows developer, you will be right at home writing UNO platform gallery sample code snippets. And I will just open one of those examples here. So for example, button is showcasing the different styles of button. So we have elevated button, fill buttons, and so on. And each of the samples then has a XAML code that you can just take, copy and paste into your application. So this is like ready-made code snippets that can be reused in your app. And writing new samples is quite easy. So if you go to, maybe I will browse it locally because it's easier for me, as GitHub is crashing a little bit. So I will open it here in UNO Gallery, and I will show you where to find the samples. So we have a shared folder which contains views, and there are sample pages. And these are all the sample pages that are in that application. So if I am looking for button samples, so this is the button sample page that I just showed you on the website. You can see the elevated, icon elevated, and so on styles. And basically all the samples look just like this. You have a XAML display control, which then contains your XAML code, which is then automatically built and visualized here. But also the XAML that's inside is then hidden in this show XAML button. So if you open this flyout, or well, not flyout, but drop down, would say you will find the XAML there. And that's exactly what you are doing with the XAML display control. This basically just allows you to write some XAML that you will not only display, but also show source code of. So, all right. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, I can help answer. But if there are no questions, we can move on to some other area now. Right. So far, so good, it seems. So let's jump to finding a good issue to get started, because except for Gallery, where you can kind of invent your own issue if you have a control where you want to showcase some specific API, some property that is not there yet, you can make a PR without actually having an issue. But in general, we have a lot of issues reported, and it can be kind of hard to pick the right one that matches your expertise, or matches your interests, or matches the specific platforms that you can debug on. Because, for example, iOS or macOS require you to have a Mac at hand. So if you want to more easily pick an issue, The best thing you can do is to filter issues in a repository by the good first issue label. And this label is manually added to issues that are not too complex and can be handled by new contributors. Of course, it's not always the case. You sometimes make mistakes, and something that looks easy is not actually easy. But in general, these issues should be on the easier side. And so anything that's labeled good first issue should be a good place to start if you want to start contributing. You can also notice we have labels difficulty that gives you an idea of how difficult that issue should be. So you can see that this one is a starter issue that is a good first issue, so it should be quite easy to get implemented. This one, even though it's a good first issue, it might be more difficult, so more on the more difficult range. So even though it might be a good place to start to learn about debugging specific thing, it might be a little bit more difficult to actually fix it. So most of the good first issues are starters, but there are some that are considered more complex. So you might want to focus on those that make more sense to you and that sound like something that you would be interested in. Because like if I'm not a fan of Android, it's probably unlikely I will be picking Android issues. But there are many others like Skia issues or internals issues like resource dictionaries, visual state setters, and so on. So you can pick really the area that's most influential for you and dive into it and learn about the code base. And that really helps because even though I'm working on UNO platform for like 4 years now, I wouldn't ever say that I have good knowledge of the code base because it's just so large and there are so many areas. So I do understand some specific areas more, and on some in other areas I am really lost and need help from other team members. So it's completely normal to feel overwhelmed when you are coming into a new area of the code. But I promise you it gets better, and as you learn more and contribute more, it will get easier to understand and figure out what is happening everywhere. There is a question about how to contribute to UNO templates. Yes, how to contribute to UNO templates. I think actually I didn't contribute to UNO templates myself that much, just small changes. But I think you can just clone the repository, fork it first, then clone it, and then in the source folder there is UNO templates folder, which should contain content folder, and inside of it is UNO app. Two different things. One is UNO app, one is UNO MAUI library, which is for the MAUI embedding feature. And in UNO app, you can find, I'm not sure why GitHub is crashing so much. It's probably because of Edge developer, but whatever. Anyways, in this area, you can find a solution file, which you should be able to open and then use as a normal application where you can edit some things and then run. I think it's supposed to work like this, where you have a working application which contains some poundif directives that are then recognized by the UNO Studio and UNO extension for .NET New, and that takes care of transforming that into a new solution. But I'm not completely sure. Maybe someone else would be more could provide a more detailed description, and maybe we can get someone else from the team also to talk about specific areas, because I mostly focus on UNO platform core, but there are other people who are focusing on different areas. So in case of UNO templates, I think it would be Dan Siegel or Nick Randolph who would be able to give a detailed description of how to contribute specifically to this area. So we can ask them if they can do a live stream as well and give a more detailed intro into UNO templates. Yes, thank you, Dominic, for that. That you can confirm that it gets better as you go along. And Dominic specifically started in UNO Gallery. As I mentioned, that's the best initial place to start because that's just Windows development. And he slowly started to take UNO platform core issues, and he's getting more and more knowledgeable about specific places of that code base. He's now focusing on non-UI API, so sensors like accelerometer and magnetometer and so on. So here's a good example of how you can slowly learn more and more about the code base and get more proficient in understanding of how to contribute into different areas of the code. The question is there somewhere more info about how the different heads are built? I'm not sure what you mean by how they are built, if you can be more specific. I will be showing how to clone the UNO platform repository and how to pick platform target that you want to run and run it locally. But if you have some specific question around how anything is built, or I'm not sure where you're... oh, right. How to convert from WinUI to Skia GTK, for example. So you're thinking how the WinUI code that you write in UNO platform just happens then to show up in GTK, or is that what you mean? Find it docs maybe. All right. I think there was a FAQ on how things are rendered in UNO platform. How UI is rendered. I think this might be what you are asking for. How the UI is rendered on each specific target. But if it's not what you mean, yes. In that case, this article should be able to explain in more detail. But in general, we are using a mixed mode rendering approach where on mobile targets, most of the controls that we render are based on native views. So we are using native UI view in iOS and native view group on Android, but they are composed. So we are not using, for example, UI button on iOS. It's actually a UI view which is rendered using native rendering capabilities, but to achieve that customizability and themability that UWP and WinUI is providing, we have to render the view ourselves. So as a result, it's not a UI button, but it is a UI view, which allows you to easily compose your application from native views and UNO platform views. So you can embed a native Google Maps component, for example. So that's how we do it on iOS and Android and Mac OS. And then we have Skia, also WebAssembly, where we are rendering using HTML, which means that each element is a div, and this allows us to provide also accessibility support. So if you want to make your application accessible, we are setting the area tags or attributes on different elements so that it is readable for UI readers. screen readers. And finally, there is Skia, which is rendered, Skia targets, which is WPF and GTK, and also Linux frame buffer. And those are not rendered using native elements, but purely using Skia Sharp. So all of the elements on the screen are rendered using Skia Sharp rendering library, except for input elements like text box, where we are overlaying the native text box control. So on WPF, when you click a text box, a native WPF text box is showing up on top of it and is handling the input. So that should be kind of the overview of how everything is built. And then, of course, when you write a XAML code, we are generating a C# code that handles creating of those controls, which are then put into the visual tree and are then rendered using one of those approaches. So that should hopefully explain all the main things there. Yeah, if that's answers the question enough, or if you want more details, I'm happy to provide. Right. So where was I? Yes. So yes, I went through the good first issues and how to pick a proper first issue for you. There is also a label Hacktoberfest, which will be useful when Hacktoberfest starts in October, but I will be talking about that at the end more. So for now, these difficulty and good first issue labels are most useful. And if you are interested in some specific area like resources, you can filter by that label as well. So we are trying to label every issue by the area in which it kind of falls. So we have project resources for resources like things, then non-UI for non-UI APIs. We have also platform tags. So if you are interested in Android issues, you can use platform/Android to filter for those and so on. So you can just browse all the labels and kind of zoom in on the specific thing that interests you and that you feel most comfortable in. Yeah, that is quite a lot of those labels now. So, all right. Let's now jump into some explainer on how to get UNO platform running, the UNO platform repository running locally. And I will be focusing on UNO platform core. As I mentioned, I'm usually working on that. But in general, each of the repositories have a similar way to run them. So it should be quite similar to this one. This one is probably the most complex to get running, but once you get this one running, you should be fine running the other ones. So, first off, you want to fork the UNO platform repository that you want to clone. So you fork it, give it a name, and put it in your own GitHub profile. I already have a fork, so I cannot create another one, but if I go to my fork here, this is the fork of my UNO platform, of the UNO platform repository, and I can, I have to sync it just to update it to the latest, but I can now clone it locally, and you can do it using this green button, and you can clone it. And there are various ways you can clone it. One is using GitHub Desktop, which is the desktop GitHub application for cloning. You can also use Visual Studio, or if you want to go with my favorite tool, that's a Fork, which is a GitHub visualizer that makes it easier to work with Git. And I prefer it to the console environment because it's just more visual and you can see the individual branches in the flow. So you can use Git fork or other Git UI application on the desktop that will give you the same experience. So you just then clone your UNO platform fork and get it to load locally on your hard drive. So I have it here. Well, actually I have multiple clones of the same thing, so I can work in parallel on multiple issues, but that's really not required. So in the UNO platform repo, you have everything that consists, that makes up the UNO platform core project itself. So maybe I should do a quick walk through those things that are there, so it's more easy to understand. So maybe like this. I will start here in the GitHub folder. Here you can find the issue templates that are used by GitHub to generate that nice list of issue templates. Let me go back to UNO platform. UNO. So this thing is defined by what you find in this folder. So that contains everything. Then you have some workflows that we are using to label PRs, automatically add labels there, and also convert the code base between UWP and WinUI. I will explain that later. Then we have some specific GitHub things like dependabot, which updates dependencies and so on, but probably not that much interesting for contributors. Then we have build folder, which takes care of building everything in CI. And this is very complex. There are actually many things that happen during the CI, and I can even show you how complex that is. If I go here, you can see that the tree of how UNO platform is built is kind of large. If I go to one of the older builds that is already done, maybe this one is completely green, you can see that it's kind of a big thing, and there is a lot of tests running also. So you can see 65,000 tests are being run on the CI to verify everything and to validate all the features. So it's a very large project actually, and we have some specific limits adjusted by Microsoft so that we can even run everything in the CI. So it's pretty cool, because I've never seen anything of this scale anywhere else than here. So that's pretty nice. All right, where was I? Yeah. So that's the CI. Everything regarding that is there. So I will not go in more detail through this. So you can browse and see how each of the individual CI steps is done, but that's probably not that interesting right now. Then we have documentation that I already mentioned before, so nothing too interesting there. So if you want to contribute docs, you can like dive in this folder and focus on that. But the most interesting part, of course, is the source code, and that's in this source folder. And there is a lot of things there, so I might have to go through that. Or maybe let's do it like this. I will open the solution in Visual Studio and show you the specifics. All right. Okay, maybe let's start with this thing. So when you first clone the repository, you will see it like this, and there is this nice file cross-targeting override.props.sample, and this one allows you to pick a specific platform that you want to build against, because UNO platform is very large and there are so many platforms: Android, iOS, macOS, Mac Catalyst, Skia WPF, Skia GTK, Skia Linux Frame Buffer, WebAssembly, and also unit tests, and that's hopefully everything. And right, also Windows. So there's a lot of things. And it would be a nightmare to run Visual Studio with all of these targets loaded at once. That would completely kill your memory and you wouldn't be able to write any line of code. So instead, what you can do is to copy this cross-targeting override props sample file and rename it to cross-targeting override.props. And in that file, you can, if it ever loads, you can uncomment this line Uno target framework override. And what this does is that it allows you to override the target framework that the solution is built against. And there are several of these. You can find a helpful table in the file. If you want to just build Windows, you use this one. If you want to build WebAssembly or Skia, you can use .NET 7. If you want to build just iOS, you select .NET 7's -iOS and so on. And for each of these targets, you can also find a solution filter. And that solution filter is a subset of the solution that's specifically for that specific platform. So if you want to only work on a Skia specific issue, what you would do is to use .NET 7 framework override and then open the Uno UI Skia only solution filter. And that will give you the best developer experience because you will only see the projects that are specifically for Skia and specifically build the Skia platform, which will speed up the build significantly. So yes, I think that's the most important thing. You can also uncomment this line, accelerate builds in Visual Studio, which is a new feature in Visual Studio, which is not yet enabled by default, but should speed up your builds significantly. So it's worth having it on, and I have it on most of the time, and I haven't encountered any significant problems, so it should be fine to use. Now, let's close this, and I will open the Skia solution filter specifically because I picked .NET 7 as the target framework. And now let's open it here and let's browse what the solution contains. So as you can see, it's 53 projects loaded, which is a lot, but still less than 142 projects total. So definitely solution filters help, and that override means that we are now building only against Skia. All right. So let me just go through the individual folders in a meaningful order. So maybe the first place to start is something that's not actually needed anymore. This folder contains solution templates for the legacy projects like UWP. So this one is not really too interesting anymore. There are solution items, which are just various files like build props and build targets. And then let's go to like Uno XAML. There's just helpers for XAML compilation. Not really too interesting here. But the most interesting one is Uno UI. So this folder contains the Uno platform code itself. And there are many projects inside. So I will try to explain what each is. So what you find in Windows runtime, so the non-UI APIs like accelerometer or GPS geolocator and so on, all that lives in Uno project. In this case, everything has the Skia suffix, but like the main name is Uno itself. So in the Uno project, for less confusion, I will probably open the Uno unit tests, maybe. Might be better. Right, it's if the tests suffix. Oh well. All right. Let's suppose the suffix is not there, but like for each of the targets, there is a specific suffix. So in this case, there's Kia. If you were targeting unit test, there's .tests, and if you were targeting WebAssembly, there's .WebAssembly, and so on. So in the UNO project, you find the non-UI APIs. So if you are interested in enabling sensors or device-specific features or things that are not visible in the UI but are impactful for the life cycle of the application or to the usability of to integration of platform-specific and device-specific features, this is the place to do it. Then we have UNO Foundation, which contains the foundational structures and classes that are found in Windows.Foundation namespace in Windows. So those are things like deferral, async status. There is, for example, point or rect or size and so on. So there's a lot of things that are coming from Windows.Foundation. Then we have UNO Composition, which contains composition-related classes. So composition brush, composition clip, composition geometry, and so on. Then we have UNO Dispatching, which contains the core dispatcher for UNO platform. Then we can go forward to the biggest project, which is UNO UI, and that contains all the UI controls and UI elements in UNO platform. So this is the one that's probably most interesting and fun to work with, because it's just huge and humongous and there is so much to do. And the general structure of the project and even the other projects as well is that we are trying to follow the namespace schema of Windows. So if you want to look for something like windows.ui.xaml.media.brush, you want to go to UI folder, to XAML folder, to media, and then you have the brush there. So it kind of makes sense because it's the same folder structure that you would expect in a Windows application. So this is kind of easy to navigate to the specific thing you are looking for. And for even easier navigation, you can search using code search. So it's Control-T and you write something like window.cs. So there is this. This is the file for the window class in Windows UI.xaml. All right. Now, for the remainder of projects, let me show you. There is UNO UI Toolkit, which is kind of a weird project which contains some helper extensions or methods that are usable across all targets, including Windows. Because on Windows, UNO platform is not really there. We are just relying on Windows, on WinUI to do its thing. So on Windows, you are not actually using UNO and UNO UI. There's just the UNO Toolkit, which contains some additional helpers like elevated view or visible bounce padding and so on. All right, so next up we have logging related stuff. So there is UNO Foundation logging and UNO Extensions logging. That's just for logging purposes within the UNO platform repository. So not that interesting. Then we have UNO Fluent theme, and this contains the Fluent UI styles for controls, and that's coming from Microsoft's Fluent UI theme. So if I go to Microsoft UI XAML and select the control, then these files that you can find there are basically what you can then find in the Fluent theme folders. So if I go here, open resources, version 2, priority default, you can find Breadcrumb is not here. Right, breadcrumb is specific case because that one is hosted differently, but most of the other ones like content dialog or color spectrum, color picker, and so on are here. And those are basically just copies of the same files from Microsoft. So not much to do there. It's already been copied and done there. So next up, let's go to here. Remote control is used to facilitate hot reload scenarios and some additional interactivity. So not really that much interesting if you want to contribute to UNO platform itself, but just know that it's there and it's being compiled with your application. Next up, there are some runtime libraries. There is runtime.gtk, runtime.linux framebuffer, then .wpf, and each is for specific flavor of the Skia project. So if you want to see the GTK specific code, you will find it in this GTK project. And the same thing for framebuffer and for WinWPF. But these are really platform specific projects, and you will probably do only platform specific things there. If you want to build something that's cross-platform, then it belongs more into the UNO UI project. If there are any questions, feel free to ask and I will answer. Right. So what I didn't tell you about yet. Right, there is runtime test, but I will talk specifically about tests later. So let's keep that in mind. And I am just checking if I forgot something here. Yeah, so that's probably from the main ones. There is also generators folder, which contains the source generators for UNO platform. And those are particularly interesting to people who are fond of building C# code generators. And there are quite a few of them, and some are very complex. So for example, the XAML generator is super complex. So if you're interested in building or learning about building C# code generators, then this is a great place to go and investigate. There's a lot of code there, so yeah, I actually don't understand most of it. I did just some minor fixes there, but it's super complex and it's kind of complex to get started, I think. But if you are into source generation, then you will probably have a much easier time getting started. And to make it complete, I will also point you to troubleshooting source generation, which contains the information how to actually contribute to that area and how to build that and how to debug it and so on. So if you are interested in that thing, you can check this link. All right. That's that. And now let's go back to the solution. So I went through generators. I didn't mention XAML host, which is used for the UNO island. So it's hosting UNO platform content inside of WPF application. It's kind of a niche thing, but it might be interesting to someone. Right, so if we step out of here, we have tools here, which is used to, these are some tools that are used by UNO platform. I will talk about UWP sync generator later, but just noting that it's there. I'll just make a note of it. So right, there we go. Then we have solution template. I mentioned that. Right, so we go into add-ins. We have some add-ins into UNO platform. There is Lottie for Lottie animations. There is MSAL for Microsoft Authentication Library. There is SVG for SVG embedding. And finally, media player for specifically GTK to display media inside of the app. So those just add-ins that are not required to be part of your UNO platform applications, but that you can install and enhance the UNO platform experience this way. So now let's jump into Samples app, which is another big area. And the Samples app is an app that's used to learn, to test specific features of UNO platform, and is the application that we use to build new features, test features, and run tests also. So it's a kind of a large application with many samples. And I see that I have a question here. What is the best way to debug some modification? Yes, yeah, exactly, right. So that's exactly what I'm gonna tell you now. So the Samples app is the perfect place to do that. Because the Samples app contains a lot of samples that are specifically for this purpose. There are many already built, but you can add yours, and I will just build it so you can see how it looks. The Samples app is supposed to be fully cross-platform, so you can run it even on UWP on Windows. So you can first test your changes or test your features directly on Windows, and then verify they work the same way on UNO platform. But I will just run this and build this. Might take a while to compile. So here we go. Right, I was debugging something before, so I will just remove that breakpoint. And yeah, this is the UNO platform Samples app. It has a kind of bare bones UI, but it does a lot of things, and it's very helpful. So I will just guide you through what it can do. So the Samples app contains this menu of samples. You can see in the parentheses, you can see how many samples for each of the categories is there. And if you open a specific category, you can then browse and open a specific one. So I don't know, maybe brushes might be interesting. Let's do gradients page. You can see some gradient brushes that are tested here, and you can then verify that's if something is working correctly or not. There are even more interactive ones, like buttons is a classic sample that you can check some checkboxes, you can disable buttons, and you can just generally test how buttons work. And there are several useful buttons in this area on top. There is this button refresh, which just a very basic thing. It unloads the current page and reloads it again in a clean slate. So if you are testing something that's reproducible just once, you can then refresh and start anew from clean slate. So this button is super useful. Then you have a favorite button, which allows you to save a specific sample into this favorites area where you can then more quickly get to it. Then you have FL button, which turns the UI of the application into Fluent style. So if I click it and refresh the page, it will show everything in Fluent UI, the Fluent style with Fluent buttons and rounded corners and so on. So now it's Fluent styled. We have also dark themes, so you can switch between light and dark theme for each sample. Of course, some samples are not really built for dark theme, but when you are building something that requires both themes to work correctly, then this is a useful feature. And finally, there's a right to left support, which is currently available only on Skia, and which was added like last week by Yusuf. It's super new, but it works pretty well. So you can switch the UI into a right to left configuration. So that's just basic walk through the features here. And so you can browse some samples, play with them, test how they work on each platform, or build your own sample. Just to explain these, there is a recents button, which gives you access to the pages that you browsed recently. And there's also search that you can use to search for a specific sample that interests you. All right. And now there's also runtime tests, which are run using this button. And I will explain those in a little bit. So stay tuned for that part. But just know it's under this button. Those are runtime tests. And finally, this button runs automated screenshot tests. And this is not really used on local machine. This is run usually in CI. So this is not that interesting for you probably. All right. I think that's all for the basics of the samples app. And each of the platforms has its own samples app. So GTK, if I run a GTK samples app, it should display the same thing just using GTK. Let's see. But in the meantime, while it's building, I will show you where to put your own samples when you have one. So if you build something new and want to test it, you can go to this UI test shared project, which contains all the sample pages. Oh, right. It's already launching, so I will just show you. Just the same thing, GTK-based application, and you can do exactly the same things just on GTK. And again, this is running also on Android, iOS, macOS, and so on. So everywhere you can test the same thing this way. But let's go back here. So UI test shared contains all the sample pages that we have in the app. And it's quite easy to add new samples. You just put that sample in a appropriate location. So if I was building a new button sample, I would put it into a button section. Name it somehow, and just build a user control or page that's up to you, up to the preference. And then that page can be even simpler actually. So I will switch to something more appropriate, maybe this one. It is just a plain page that contains some content that is then displayed within the UNO platform samples app. So plain old user control, with just one exception, that you add this attribute of sample control info or sample maybe. This one is kind of legacy, so I will switch to one that's more up to date. Not this one. It was just added recently, so I'm not actually sure which one was updated more recently. Maybe this one, no. This one, maybe this one. Okay, so this attributes sample attribute gives you the ability to set categories. So that's the list of categories that you saw in the samples app. And just setting the category is enough for that sample to show up in the list. So now this slider header class will show up in the slider section in the samples app, and you can browse to it and open it. But if you want more control, you can also provide a description, which is a textual description that's shown in the bottom navigation bar of the page. And you can also specify that that page should be ignored in screenshot tests, which is something that's run in the CI. You can specify if it's a manual test or if it's something that's automated. So if the feature that you're building can be tested automatically, then you would set its manual test to false, otherwise to true. And I think false is the default. Then you have the name, which you can use to override to something more friendly. If the name was not friendly, I could do slider header with exclamation mark, for example. But that's not a great name, so let's not do that. But like this overrides the name of the class here. Then we have one more interesting one, which is view model type. And that's used to build a view model if you want to build quite a simplistic MVVM style sample. So I can go to one of the devices sensors samples, which usually use those. So if I go to compass tests, this one was built by Dominic here. So the view model is here, and you can that's automatically hooked up to the page, and you can then write a view model which contains some specific MVVM based handling, so commands, properties, and stuff like that. Pretty classic, normal MVVM style programming, just in a samples app, and then you can use it to verify your features quite easily. Yep, so that should be the basic overview of the samples app and what it contains. One more interesting one can be the UNO Islands samples app, which is a special version of the samples app, which is running as an embedded UNO island inside of WPF. So this is the mixing of WPF UI with UNO platform content. So if I run this one, you will see it's a little bit different because it's just a WPF window which contains a samples app inside of a red border. So it's kind of used to distinguish between UNO platform samples app classic and Islands samples app. And this one is there to verify every feature works not only in a classic UNO platform applications, but also in Islands-based apps. Right. Are there no questions so far? Everything's making sense? If not, I'm happy to help. Just say the word and I will help out. All right. I think that's the major things covered. So let's now switch to something else entirely. So maybe I should explain how the code is. Oh, right. There's one question now. Why some runtime tests have a run in UI thread attribute, or why that's not everywhere, and so on. So I will address this just when I get to runtime tests. But if I forget, please ping me again. I should cover it, but if I forget, I will try to do that when I get to tests. It's gonna be very soon. So so many things to cover. All right. So what I want to do before the tests, I want to just show you the basic structure of the solution and how features are implemented. So one of the promises of UNO platform, and I think that's also on the code or the web page there, Windows 10 and 11, maybe there. Yeah, that UNO platform simply makes the same code base as you are writing Windows application run on more platforms. So all the other ones like mobile and WebAssembly and Skia and so on. And we achieve that by having the same namespaces, the same API surface, the public API surface as Windows. And if we were to maintain this manually, it would be a terrible, terrible nightmare. So we want to avoid this, of course. And we have a special feature just for this purpose. So if you go to any of those projects that I showed you, like UNO Foundation, UNO itself, or UNO UI, you will find a generated folder. And this folder is completely auto-generated and contains all the APIs that Windows contains. So if you go to Microsoft UI.xaml.controls, you will find all of those APIs that are in Windows there. And I can go to one of the things that's not yet implemented. For example, that's implemented. Okay. To some of those non-implemented ones. Let's see. Documents, paragraph. Okay, that's already there also. Okay, something else. Let's see. Key tip placement. No, everything is implemented. That's weird. So maybe composite transform, no, come on. Something has to be not implemented, right? Yeah, right. Okay, so if you go into the generated folder, for some feature that is not implemented, it will look like this. It will contain the class with all its members marked with this #if Android or iOS or unit test or WebAssembly and Skia and everything. Yeah, it seems like we support everything already, so yeah, what can you do? But if you happen to find out something that's not supported, then yeah, this is the place. So these #if statements are used to signify that some things are not yet implemented. They are covering this not implemented attribute, which is then recognized by Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code when you're writing code, and is underlining your code when you are using something which is not yet supported in UNO platform. Because those things would necessarily throw an exception, throw a not implemented exception when you were trying to use it. So you need to be notified ahead of time that those things are not implemented so that you can do a platform-specific workaround, for example. So if you want to implement some new feature which is not yet supported, you would go into this generated folder to that specific class that you want to implement, and then not implement those things that you want to implement in real life. So for example, if I wanted to implement this media transponder controls thumbnail requested event arcs class, what I would do usually is first copy this whole file from here and put it out of the generated folder into the appropriate folder inside of the solution. So ui.xaml.media and here. So it should belong here because that's the namespace where it lives. So if I paste it here, you can see media transform controls thumbnail request. And now I have the same class in two places. And that works because we are using partial keyword everywhere. So now, even though I have that same class in the generated folder, I have the same thing also here. And I can now decide what I want to implement and what I don't want to implement. So, for example, let's suppose that I am able to implement the set thumbnail image everywhere. In that case, what I would do is I would remove this. And let's just ignore these for now. Just ignore these. And so let's suppose this file would look like this. Now the method is implemented everywhere. I would write some code to like implement this. And then I have this error here that says this is already defined because the same method already lives in that generated folder. So I would go here, and in the generated folder, I would then mark those platforms that are implemented as already implemented. So in this case, I implemented the method everywhere. So I would go like this and just mark it as false. This means that now the method is already completely implemented and there is nothing else that needs to be done for it. So that's the first common scenario. The second common scenario is that you have a method that can be implemented on some platform, but not all of the platforms. And that can be also done here. So if I supposedly have this get deferral method and I know how to implement it only on Android, what I would do is I would create another file here, which would be called media. Let me copy this super long thing instead of typing it. I would write it here and put a dot at the end and write Android. So now this file that will be created has the .android suffix, And that signifies that this file will be only compiled specifically on Android. I will just put the same public partial class code there. I have to put it in the same namespace because that was generated incorrectly. But now I can put Android specific code in this file and it will compile only on Android. So if I were to implement get deferral there, I could do it like this. I could just put that method there, write some code to implement it, code, which could even use some Android specific APIs like Android.views.viewGroup and stuff like that, or like Android.context, like context of the view and so on. So I can write platform specific code there, and then I just need to make sure again that I go to the generated file and mark Android as implemented. So I replace this with false and remove Android from here. And that means that this method is implemented, but only on Android. On all the other platforms, the code will be underlined as not implemented and you will have to work around it somehow, but on Android you will be able to use it. So this is how you would implement a feature that's implementable only on a specific target or specific targets. And these file suffixes that are automatically recognized, there are several of them. We have Android, we have iOS, we have iOS, macOS if you want to target both, because those are usually quite similar. We have Skia, we have macOS, we have unit tests for unit test specific feed purposes. I will show that later. We have WebAssembly for WebAssembly, and there is also a reference that's used for reference build, which I will and I should probably also explain. So let's do that now actually. So WebAssembly and Skia targets don't have a specific platform target platform moniker. If we go here, you can see that we have a platform moniker for iOS, for Android, for Mac Catalyst, for macOS, and for Windows UWP. But WebAssembly and Skia have the same platform target platform override. So they are considered the same thing, so to speak. But at runtime, UNO platform application then picks the right implementation. So whether you're targeting WebAssembly, it will pick WebAssembly. If you're targeting Skia, it will pick Skia. And this whole thing is kind of complex. But the important thing there is that we have something called a reference build, which builds a reference library which contains no implementation of almost anything, but this one is then swapped at runtime with the actual target, so WebAssembly or Skia. The specifics of it is probably documented in the documentation somewhere. I'm not completely sure if yes, it should be runtime. Let's see, runtime. No. Reference build. It should be somewhere, I think. Reference build. Markdown. Okay, I don't see it here. But like in general case, you shouldn't have any problems with this, because the reference target is automatically also included here. So this is the reference target, and that should take care of providing the stub for that method or property for you. You shouldn't have to implement it yourself. But in case you were implementing something that's only available on WebAssembly, some WebAssembly specific API. You also need to provide that API for .NET Standard reference, because for the reference build, otherwise the users of UNO platform wouldn't be able to see that API or use that API from a public application. So that's just a summary of that, but it's kind of an advanced topic, so I don't expect you will need to, you would come across it too early when contributing. So it shouldn't be a big problem, but just something to be aware of. All right, so let's see. What did I not mention? I think partial classes I mentioned, and it's kind of useful to know that we have also support for these poundif statements. So if you want to write something that's platform specific inside of a non-platform specific file, like I think window.cs is doing somewhere, you can do that as well. So let's see. Not really this one. So maybe application.cs. All right. So there's some code that is using Android specific code or Skia or WebAssembly specific code. In that case, you just write poundif, Skia or WebAssembly, and that part of the code wrapped in that poundif will be compiled only for Skia and WebAssembly, not for the others. So that's super useful to know if you want to write platform-specific code without creating a separate platform-specific file. So like this. So if I want to write platform-specific code as part of the constructor, I can do it here like this. But then I can put platform-specific code for Android in a separate file if I want to. It's kind of easy to mix and match approaches. So yes, so hopefully that should be the main thing. Right. Now the auto-generated code that I showed you is generated semi-manually. It's generated manually when a new version of Windows App SDK is coming out, or when new version of Windows SDK is out. But we are also running it during CI, so you have to make sure that you are properly updating these generated files, and during CI these will be regenerated automatically, so the changes will be reflected there automatically. There is a very nice feature of the UNO platform CI is that it makes sure that we don't modify the public interface and don't create accidental breaking changes. So for that purpose, we have a CI step that checks everything has the same public API surface as the previous release. And if not, you have to manually either remove that, undo that public API change, or you can specify that public API change was intentional. And we can do it in this package diff-ignore file, which is in the build folder. So as you can see, we had some methods there which are not really part of WinUI. So we added these here so that we can remove them as part of the next set of breaking changes. Again, this is kind of an advanced topic, but you might encounter it. But don't worry, you won't make any random accidental public API change, because the tool will make sure that it doesn't happen. So if you accidentally change something or make something that was previously not public, it will notify you during the CI and fail the build, and you will know why that happened. Okie dokie. So I think that's covering this. And now let's finally get to the long mentioned and requested tests. So if you're contributing some new feature that is testable, it is kind of a requirement to actually add a automated test that can test it. And we have several different types of tests in UNO platform, so I will go through each of them to explain what it does. So first kind of tests is unit tests. I will open the unit test solution filter. These tests are actual unit tests that are running, that can be run as part of Visual Studio, and these tests are kind of fake bootstrapping an application and then running some simple non-UI tests on it. So there are tests for kind of the core components of UNO platform. You could find here tests for resource dictionaries, for resource candidates, for resource loader. You can find tests for like UNO globalization features, UNO foundation collections, and so on. Those are just classic unit tests, and usually they don't even require any Windows specific APIs, or like, no, not Windows specific APIs, but like UI APIs. They are just running some specific unit test of a small API in the surface of UNO platform. So here, if you are looking into XBind or binding expressions, you would write your tests here in the unit tests only project, and specifically as part of the uno.ui.unit.test. So this is the place for all the unit tests that don't require UI and running application. So this is the most basic type of tests. And now we ramp up a little bit and go to more advanced tests. So I will switch to Android here and show you how we UI test Android. Here we go. In here I have the .NET Core mobile project solution filter. Sorry, I have to close this. So here we have the samples app, and inside of the samples app folder there is samples app.ui tests, and this project contains actual UI tests that are run as part of the CI. And the special thing about these is that it uses the platform-specific UI testing framework for Android, iOS, and WebAssembly. So on Android and iOS it uses Xamarin UI tests, and on WebAssembly it uses Selenium, and it's running inside of the browser. So these tests are run this way, and just open one of the sample tests here. For example, let's see, tree view. No, we have, let's see, maybe slider tests. So this code essentially runs the samples app, navigates to a specific sample, like the slider header that we saw before, and then it looks for some specific control and maybe clicks on that control or slides that control or makes some kind of input. And then it can verify that a specific thing happened. So this is kind of very simple way of testing UI. It's kind of funky sometimes because the Xamarin UI tests library is not that stable, I would say. So it can be a challenge to get it running. But if you want to test something in a very specific way and it requires UI testing, then this is a good place to go. But as I mentioned, it's quite important to know that these tests are run only in the browser and on the mobile platforms, so Android and iOS, not on the other ones. So it will not run on Skia, it will not run on GTK, it will not run on WPF and Linux frame buffer. It's not going to run there. So if you want to write something that's more cross-platform and more reliable, I would say, then I would focus on runtime tests. So you find runtime tests in the solution for every single specific platform. So if I go here in the Skia solution filter, I will find runtime tests here. UNO UI runtime tests Skia. And runtime tests are kind of a blend between unit tests and UI tests. They are run as part of a actual running application, and they are testing the UI, but they are not actual real UI tests. You can still build up the UI using normal C# code, using normal XAML, and then you can call methods on that UI, and you can even inject input in that UI. So it's kind of very flexible and allows to test many scenarios. And I can show you an example of how that looks in WPF samples app. So these runtime tests are, let me open one of those tests. So let's see, controls, border, no, let's see, slider unit tests maybe. Well, this is key down, maybe in something else. Let's see, border. Yeah, that could be a fun one. So this is just plain old XUnit based test that is using XAML controls to build up some UI, then loads that UI into the samples application and then tests that somehow. So here you can see that that this test is creating a border control, and then a custom control, another border, and then sets the window content to be that border, waits for it to load, and then verifies some behavior, some dimensions, some desired size, some arrange and sizing and stuff like that. So this test, when I open samples app, go to runtime test here, and enter the name of the test, I can run it. And you can see it run the test and displayed some UI on the right side. So this is actually testing the UI inside of a running application on each of the targets. So this will run in CI on Skia WPF, Skia GTK, on Android, iOS, and even on the Mac, and yeah, and WebAssembly also. So it's complete test coverage on all the targets of UNO platform, which is super cool and super useful. And this is probably the most preferred way of testing new features, because this will ensure that everything works on all targets, not just the ones that are supported by normal UI tests. So yes, so runtime tests are run via this UI, where you can write the name of your test, just the method name basically, and then you run it using the run button, and it runs and shows you if it failed or didn't fail. And there are many like helper methods inside of that window helper class, where you can find like window content, wait for a condition to be true and stuff like that. And when you want to verify something, you just use classic assert.requal and stuff like that. So this is very similar to normal unit tests, except you are actually testing the UI, not just units of non-UI code. So that's pretty cool and super useful even for non-UNO platform applications, because it gives you more control and allows you to test everywhere, not only on like without the running application as part of, you know, like a classic class library. This can run inside of the actual application, and you can see the result and confirm that everything is okay. Now, to that question that was in the chat, there is this runs on UI thread attribute that you can add to either the class or a method. And it's actually very important, because by default, the tests can be run on non-UI thread. So if I was to remove this, it would be possible that these tests would run on non-UI thread, which is not a problem if you are testing a non-UI feature, but it is a problem if you are constructing UI. So if I were to run this now, it would probably crash because I would try to create a UI element on a non-UI thread, and that would kill the application. So it's something that's best to avoid. And so if you need to use UI inside of your runtime tests, then make sure that you have this runs on UI thread marked on your class or on the method. So that's kind of important. It's also useful to know that you can use data row attributes to provide some data and run the same test with different parameters or attributes. And finally, you can also ignore tests. As you can see, this specific test is only running on Android or on Skia or on WebAssembly. So we are ignoring it for now on Android, iOS, and macOS. So that's hopefully a good overview of runtime tests. I'm thinking if I forgot something. Yes, I forgot something. There is also requires full window attribute, which I'll try to find in the solution somewhere. Yeah, for example, here, this requires full window attribute makes the test run as a full window test. So if I run a test like verified pane display mode, blah, 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 it should run. It's too fast to see, I would say. Oh, it's completely ignored. That's this way. Let's try some other one, which is not. Okay, this one maybe. This has no UI. Okay, maybe some other test which is actually displayed. Maybe this one could be. No, too fast. Hard to find a good example here. Maybe focus tests, some of them. Hard to say. Let's try this one. So you can see this test launches its UI not in this sidebar, but as a full screen content of the application. And that's super useful if you are testing something that requires to be root of the window. So for example, this focus test makes only sense if you are focusing just on that one container, not on the whole application. And it's also useful if you want to display a larger UI, because the CI is running the tests in a smaller window. So if this area is not enough, then it's useful to use full window to get the full screen estate for your test. Okay, so I hope that's about it for the tests. So now let's finally talk about the WinUI code conversion. Because the codebase right now is built so that every namespace is matching the UWP API surface. So it's windows.ui.xaml.controls.button, for example. But in Windows App SDK and in WinUI 3, the namespaces were changed to match to be Microsoft.ui.xaml.controls.button and so on. So to accommodate for both of these options, our code base is built actually twice. Once for the UWP namespaces and once for the Microsoft.ui.xaml.controls namespaces. And this is done automatically as part of the CI process, but it's done using this WinUI revert tool that's there. And that is a very simple code that just does some regular expressions and replaces stuff, and that prepares the solution to be built again against WinUI. So you can see it just takes windows.ui.xaml and basically replaces that with Microsoft.ui.xaml. And that happens everywhere. This thing is run during CI, and we can then automatically generate uno.ui libraries and also the uno.winui libraries. So it's not that much interesting probably for you as you are getting started contributing, but just know that your changes, if you are doing them in the windows.ui.xaml namespace, will automatically be available even in Microsoft.ui.xaml namespace, because that's gonna happen automatically during the conversion between UWP and WinUI codebase. I think there is not that much else to it. Just as I mentioned before, during this process we also run the sync generator, so we regenerate the generated classes for Microsoft.ui.xaml controls namespaces as well. So they are both there during the build process. Okay, I think I'm almost done here. So just final step when you are done with your Epic contribution. Let's suppose I want to contribute this this change, which is not really a good change, but let's see. This change. I create a custom branch for my change. I commit my change with the proper commit name. And again, we are using conventional commits, so please follow that convention when naming the commit. So in this case, I would be doing a feat, maybe feat, as a feature, remove sample for slider header. So that's not a good change, but oh, maybe this one, maybe better. So partially implement media transport, blah blah blah. So long name, so I will skip it. So you just name that commit with the proper prefix and then commit the file to your the changes into your new branch. And then you push it, and you should head back to GitHub, where you will be able to see this notification on your fork. I'm currently in the main repo, but if I push to my fork, I would see it in my fork. That tells you compare and pull requests. When you click on that button, it will pre-populate this short description for that pull request. So you name the PR somehow, media something, event arcs, and then you write the issue name that's related to your change. So if you are fixing a specific issue, just put a number of it. So let's see, 4249, 4231, and then you tell us what does that commit actually do, if it creates a new feature or bug fix or stuff like that. You explain what was the original behavior and what is the new behavior after your change. Then finally, you have a PR checklist, which just verifies that you didn't forget something. So if I create a draft PR now, you can then go through the checklist and verify you did everything. So commits must be following conventional commit specification. That's right. I've associated the pull request with an issue. That's right, because I did this closes number 4231. It contains no breaking changes. That means you didn't accidentally do any public API surface changes, or intentionally even. Then validated PR screenshots results. So this is something that's running as part of the CI. And if you are doing UI related changes, you should then go through the artifacts that are part of the build and verify if you didn't break some screenshots. So if I go to one of the builds that are already done, yeah, let's go back to let's in the pipelines. So let's go here in pipelines. I go to CI, So for your build, when it's finished, you should be able to open the build itself and go to artifacts, and then download the which one is it? I don't see it. I don't see it here because it's behind the fold. Right, it's here. So you should download this UI test compare results, and you can then see if you change some UI related things and if that change was actually intentional, because it sometimes happens that you make a change that causes some regression. So it's best to check. But if you haven't done any UI related changes, then it's probably fine not to check for the screenshots because it shouldn't make any difference. And finally, we have unit tests and UI tests. So you can mark down if you did create a runtime test for that specific feature or not. And finally, if it's some new API, it's best to also document it. So if you have docs part of your PR, you should also check this button here. And that's voila, you are done with your PR. So when you are done with this, you can just mark the PR ready for review. Some team member will check it, will provide you some feedback, and if the PR makes sense and is useful, we will then merge it into UNO platform and you will have your first UNO platform commit in the code base. So it was exhausting probably because there was such a large amount of information, but it's kind of possible that I forgot something. So if you have some ideas of what or some additional questions that you want to ask, now is the perfect time to do that. And I will wait for a bit. If someone has any question, I will try to answer. But if there are no questions, I think we are basically ready to contribute to UNO platform. So if this is something that you want to try and you are excited about the opportunity to have your code running on thousands of devices in some thousands of applications that are running UNO platform, I strongly recommend you to try out to contribute and add some feature to UNO, because it's super fun and it is just super rewarding to see when you find an application in UNO or hear about someone using UNO platform and using your feature that you've built, and it's super cool to see. Just something very amazing. Right, I haven't shown an awesome UNO platform yet, right? Good idea. So I have a repository called awesome UNO platform on my profile here. So awesome UNO platform here. And this repository contains a list of resources for developers using UNO platform or even contributing to UNO platform. So if you have some resource, some sample, some article, blog article, or video that is about UNO platform, feel free to contribute to this repository as well, because this should be kind of a place to go if you want to get quick navigation to various things that are useful around UNO. So feel free to contribute to this, send a pull request here as well, and I will try to get it merged as soon as possible. And hopefully this list will then become part of the awesome lists repository here. Not sure if we made it in already. I don't think so. Let's see. Oh, it's still there. So although it's already, hopefully without any problems, it's not yet merged. So hopefully when they get to it, they will merge this into the awesome list repository too. So that should be a kind of a source for resources and links for useful UNO platform information. And I think I have one more thing, because now I'm not sure when you are going to be watching this video, but Hacktoberfest is nearing, which is a yearly event for open source contributions. It's actually starting in one day, which is weird. Why in one day? It's not yet October, but okay. Anyways, this event allows you to contribute your first. Okay, it's starting actually tomorrow. So, all right, it's starting tomorrow, and it's a every year happening event in October where you are asked to make your first pull request or contribute to open source projects, and you can participate in this event. Create your UNO platform pull requests, and that way you can also win some nice prizes or donate your winnings to a good cause. So this is a great way to make your contributions even more fun by contributing to Hacktoberfest and also get your first commit merged into UNO platform. So I hope that is even more motivating for you to get starting contributing to UNO. All right, I think that's it for today, unless there are more questions. And if there are no questions, then I thank you all for coming. I thank you for listening. I hope everything was answered. And if not, I am open to doing another QA session. Feel free to comment on this video and ask questions there, or start a discussion on GitHub, and I will try to be as helpful as possible and try to help you get started contributing. So thank you again, have a great day, and keep coding. Goodbye.